With Starfield having released recently and its performance still being pretty poor, let's look at yet another mod promising improved performance for low-end machines. Starfield Performance Boost mod claims between 5 and 15% improved performance without sacrificing visual fidelity, and it does so mainly by reducing resolution of static shadows in the game and doing a few other adjustments. There are two versions of this mod, a regular one and plus one, that promises even more performance improvements. But this plus version might come with reduction in visual quality. So let's compare both versions to original game settings. I'm testing these mods on a Ryzen 5 2600 CPU, RX 6650X T8GB GPU, 32GB of RAM, and with Starfield installed on 480GB Kingston SSD. On low settings, during a walk in New Atlantis, the regular all-in-one boost mod performed the best, providing around 4% better performance on average than original settings in all metrics. The all-in-one plus mod provided very slight performance advantage over original game settings, but it's basically within margin of error, so it's hard to say whether there was any actual performance benefit. During a walk in Neon, both versions of the mod performed slightly worse than original low settings, but were overall smoother, while average, minimum, and maximum frame rates were generally slightly lower than on original files. 1% and 0.1% values were on average 9% better than on original settings, and the game was generally a little bit less stuttery. While not a huge difference, to some this might be a decent reason to switch to these mods, since you're getting basically the same performance as with original settings, just with slightly less stuttering. On Mars on low settings, both mods again performed very similarly to original settings, especially in average frame rates. However, the all-in-one plus version offered slightly better 1% and 0.1% lows, and the game ran just a little bit smoother. Overall, however, the differences were minimal and hardly noticeable in real gameplay. On medium settings in New Atlantis, original settings and both of the mods performed very similarly. The full all-in-one mod provided slightly higher 1% and 0.1% lows, but nothing too exciting. At most it was around 4% performance advantage. In average, minimum, and maximum frame rate values, both mods performed very closely to original settings, the all-in-one plus mod especially providing basically the exact same performance as original settings. In Neon on medium settings, the regular all-in-one performance mod performed the best, with 1% lows and 0.1% lows especially being considerably higher than on original settings or the all-in-one plus settings, by around 8% on average. Average, minimum, and maximum frame rates were also slightly higher than on other settings, while all-in-one plus mod actually performed worse than original settings, especially in minimum FPS, with minimum frame rate being less than half of the minimum frame rate on original settings. And not only that, the RAM usage paradoxically was higher on all-in-one plus mod than original settings, so there's definitely something messed up with this mod for AMD cards. It might work much better on Nvidia cards. On forums there are people claiming it increased FPS by massive amount, but Starfield is heavily AMD optimized. All-in-one plus mod does basically nothing for AMD cards here, especially if you're CPU bottlenecked on low-end machine. On Mars on medium settings, both of the performance mods performed slightly worse than original settings. 1% and 0.1% lows were lower on both versions of the mod, while average, maximum, and minimum frame rate stayed within margin of error from original settings. The RAM usage was higher by around 7% on both mods when compared to original settings, so the mod does something, but it gives no obvious performance boost. But again, Starfield is extremely well optimized for AMD right out of the box, and on this system, it is CPU bound, so on a different computer with Nvidia card and no CPU bottleneck, it might perform considerably better. But at least for low-end machines with AMD components, there's basically no reason to use either version of this mod. I've tested this mod on high and ultra settings too, but the story is the same, so no point in showing videos. Generally, the performance of both versions of the mod is at most the same, but often slightly below original settings, with all-in-one plus mod especially having some unexplained dips into low 20s for minimum frame rate, while the regular version and original settings stay firmly above 35 in most cases. RAM usage is also higher on both versions of the mod, by around 6% on average when compared to original settings. It's simply not worth using the mod on low-end AMD machines, as there's no performance boost at all. The only benefit is that in certain areas 1% and 0.1% lows are better on modded version, but those areas are few and far between, and generally both mods perform as well or slightly worse than original settings, especially because of CPU bottleneck.